morning, everyone, and thank you to the Gold Country writers for inviting me here today. I'm so thrilled to be here to share how you can add fables and food writing to your work to make it more compelling. I know in the topic it says fiction, but you can add it to anything to make it interesting. Now, before I start, I was going to share a little narrative about how I got into writing through the oral tradition of storytelling. And it all started in the Nilgiris, or Blue Mountains in South India. Now, the Blue Mountains is a small hill station in deep South India and is about 6,000 miles above sea level. So it had very temperate climate. And during the hottest summer months, when the rest of India was broiling in tropical heat, our highest temperature was 75 degrees. So when people tell me when it gets hot in Davis and Sacramento, and they go, "You should be used to the heat." No, not me. I grew up in the Nilgiris where we have the best temperature. And during the hottest months, May, June, and July, we attracted a lot of tourists from all over the world. And so during the British occupation of India, the British discovered Nilgiris and its temperate climate. And they would travel up the 14 hairpin bends to reach the Nilgiris. And the Nilgiris consist of 3 small towns on top of this mountain. And I grew up in one town and I was born in another town. They're very close to each other. Now, when the British came up to the Nilgiris, they either built little bungalows or bought little bungalows and filled it with imported furniture and housewares. And they planted hedgerows and rose gardens and dahlia bushes and held dog shows and flower shows and fruit shows. And for a while, the Nilgiris was known as Little England. Wow. And so you can imagine how it was. In 1947, when India received her independence from Britain, a lot of the British people who were living in India decided they wanted to leave, and they left behind fully furnished homes. Wow. And in 1949, 2 years after independence, my family, my mother, her brother, who's my uncle, and his mother, whom I call Granny or Mutti in my stories, moved to the Nilgiris and bought a small bungalow. Now, they moved out of our ancestral home in the plains in order to, well, they were going through a difficult time because my great-granny had just passed away and they wanted to have a fresh start. So they moved up to the Nilgiris, and I didn't know this at the time, but I was sitting and eating, the dining room chairs were made of Chippendale, and I was eating off Wedgwood china. Oh my gosh. And the story goes, my grandmother gave away the larger soup tureens and platters to the villagers because she didn't want to eat food from platters that had meat served on them. Oh. Our family has been strictly vegetarian for over 500 years, so she wasn't going to break that tradition. And so somewhere in a village in India, they're eating rice and curry out of these really expensive bowls, and they don't even know it. If Antique Roadshow went over there, they'd find some unique things. So Twilight is a very special time in Indian culture. It's that moment between, whether it's between day and night. And in India, we call it Sandhya. And it's it's a Sanskrit term for that special time. And in Indian Hindu mythology and folklore, Sandhya is a time when bad things happen. Oh. But sometimes good things happen too. And to ward off the bad things and to keep the good things coming, everybody in India, when I was growing up, households paused at Sandhya. They took a break and they said a prayer. They did some worship, which we call puja. Now, our household was no different. We paused at twilight, and my granny would call my sister and me inside, and we'd wash our faces, rinse the dust off our hands and feet, and go to the puja room. Now, the puja room was a special area that most Indian households had set aside for worship. And ours was a partitioned off spot that my mother had made from our storage room. So we had to climb over bags of rice and lentils, bunches of ripening bananas, and huge mounds of fresh coconuts to get to our puja room. And once you're inside the puja room, you could see the shelves and the walls were covered with images and statues of gods and goddesses from Hindu mythology. Hindus believe in the unity of life, so there's only one unity that flows through all of us. But to make worship easier, we have personal gods. So if you felt like you had obstacles in your life, you would pray to the elephant-headed god Ganesha to remove them. If you had an exam or some challenge at work, you would pray to Saraswati, the goddess of higher learning. If you had troubles financially, you'd pray to Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. So the gods took different forms, and we knew that, even though we knew that life was just one, unit entity, and God was, in our minds, one entity. Our God that we worshipped was Shiva. Now we have a trinity of gods. Shiva, who's the god of dance and destruction, he was our family god. So he had the main area in our puja room. And Lord Vishnu is the one you hear most about because he takes on different shapes. He takes on the avatar. He comes down as beautiful maidens to seduce people or to seduce other gods. And there's Brahma, who's the god of creation, and who there's no temples dedicated to him for some reason. So we would come to the puja room, and my sister and I would sit cross-legged on the cement floor and wait for the worship to start. And my mother would light the oil lamps and the sticks of sandalwood incense, and we would repeat the prayers that my granny would tell us. And she had heard these prayers from her mother and from her mother's mother and her mother's mother. So this was a long and sacred tradition that we were participating in. Once the prayers were over, it was my favorite time of evening. And I hope that I can entertain you the way I was entertained when I was a child by my granny, the stories that she told. Because after prayer time, it was time for storytelling. And we would sit down and listen to her stories. And my granny was a natural-born storyteller. She would take stories from Hindu mythology, fables, and weave them together and make them into magical tales. Her recurring story was about two sisters, the older sister who had to take care of the younger sister, and the younger sister who was supposed to listen to the older sister. And they were supposed to work together to whatever end. There was either a treasure hunt or a quest or saving a village or finding the boy drowning in the well. Each day was a different quest that they had to go on. And as most stories, they didn't work together well, and then finally they learned how to get along, and they accomplished whatever they were supposed to do. And then my granny would turn to me and my sister and say, see, you have to be like those sisters. You have to listen, and you have to take care of each other and not fight as much. So we knew it was a morality tale at the end of each story, but we really enjoyed it. And one of these days I'm going to go dig deep into my memories and hopefully bring those stories to life on paper. So it's not surprising that after hearing story after story, all these lies, when I started writing my own books, I wanted to draw on these stories that my grandmother had shared. And it seemed like a natural thing to do. So my books have a lot of myths and legends in them. So I tried to use stories in a way that moved the fables anyway, that moved my novel and my characters along. It gave you a little in-depth or a little insight into what the character was all about. So I've written 2 books, and this is the second book in the series. I have a 3rd book coming out in the spring. Oh, so it's called, sorry, it's like, do you all want to rise now? Seeing ceremony. And seeing ceremony is a ritual associated with arranged marriages. And so during a seeing ceremony, the groom comes and sees the bride. And if he likes what he sees, they end up getting married. The bride rarely had any say in this matter. So the first seeing ceremony is based solely on physical attributes. So if you're attractive, you got married much quicker than if you weren't. In the background of this whole ceremony, the parents were checking out the groom and was checking out the bride's family. They were making sure they were in the same social class, that the groom had a good job, the bride was able to cook. So they were checking all that out. So it's sort of like an Indian FBI background check that these aunties and matchmakers were doing. So in this book, Meena, the main character, her story starts in my mother's kitchen, And she's grown up in this book. And she goes through several seeing ceremonies before she finds the love of her life. And so the first, excuse me here, find it. Here. The first legend I want to share with you is about a god that's fairly lesser known because he's only worshipped in the deep south of India. Let me get the water if you don't mind. Sorry about that. So his name is Lord Ayyappan. The legend of Lord Ayyappan. Long ago, there was a demon named Mahishi, and like most demons, she had received a boon from the gods that she could not be killed by anyone but a child of Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu. The demon thought she was indestructible. To save the world from her, Lord Vishnu took the form of a beautiful maiden and seduced Lord Shiva. The maiden, named Mohini, gave birth to a baby boy named Ayyappan. Now the boy was left on the banks of the Pampa River, where the local king found him and adopted him. Soon after the king adopted Ayyappan, his queen gave birth to her own son named Raja. Both boys grew up together. Ayyappan was known for his intelligence, strength, and knowledge. Even his guru, his teacher, acknowledged he knew more than he did. So according to legend, Ayyappan blessed his teacher's son, who was both blind and mute, and healed him. The king had chosen Ayyappan to be his heir, but the queen wanted her own son to be crowned king. So she pretended to fall ill and conspired with her physician and the king's minister to kill Ayyappan. The physician told the king the only remedy for the queen's illness was milk from a lactating tigress. So no one, of course, volunteered to go milk a tiger, except Ayyappan. So he went into the forest looking for the tigress, and on the way he met the demoness Mahishi, which is the reason he was born, and there was a terrible battle, and he killed her. And later, on the same trip, he met Lord Shiva, his father, who blessed him and led him to a tigress. So all the pictures depicting Ayyappan in Indian mythology is him riding the tigress out of the jungle, coming back to the kingdom. Now the king heard about the queen's betrayal and begged Ayyappan for forgiveness. The Lord forgave the king and asked him to build a temple. Lord Ayyappan then returned to his heavenly abode. Every year, thousands of pilgrims visit Lord Ayyappan's temple during the winter months. So this story is a kind of a pivotal point for the main character, Meena, because as she listens to it, there's other aspects of it. I won't go into it because it's too much to explain. You have to buy the book and read it. But it shows, she kind of makes a decision on what she's going to learn in school. And so it's a pivotal point for her. And so I thought the story had significance for that. Now, after listening to this, and you're like, I don't know anything about gods and goddesses to write fiction. How am I going to do that? Well, let me tell you, my grandson, yes, I have a grandson, and he is half Finnish, quarter South Indian, and the rest of him is German, Irish, English, and Italian. So imagine the reservoir that he can draw on, the mythology, the fairy tales, the stories. And I bet most of you have heritages like that, where you can draw on so many cultural backgrounds from Asia, Europe, and Africa to write your stories. So I encourage you to do research and find a story that resonates with you and share it in your writing, whether it's writing fiction or an essay. I think it adds depth and a little bit more to a story. And on the same thing, I try to add legends or fables that somehow gave the character another dimension. And in the book, without doing any spoilers, Meena decides that she's interested in tea production, from growing the tea to processing it and brewing it and serving it as in a tea shop. And to do that, when she was in America learning at a university, she went with her relative, attended a tea ceremony in a tea shop. And the owner told her this story. Once upon a time, nearly 3,000 years ago, before Jesus Christ was born, Emperor Shenyang ruled China. One day, he was tired after walking and decided to rest under a tree. He had his servant set up camp under the tree and instructed one of his men to start a fire and boil some water. The careless manservant didn't notice a few leaves from the tree had dropped into the boiling water. He pulled the leaves out before handing a cup of hot liquid to the emperor, who liked the taste of the hot water so much that the servant confessed about finding the leaves floating in the boiling water. The tree under which the emperor had stopped was a wild tea tree, and so the tradition of tea drinking was born. Mm-hmm. So I had to do some research on talking about tea. The names for tea are so numerous: chai, te, teta. If you're interested, I think in the next month, Ethel magazine will have a story that I wrote about tea from different cultures. So, and that is a magazine. It's free online, worth subscribing to. It has interesting articles and tidbits about life as a wiser person. I'm not going to say older, wiser person. So I'm going to take a little pause and a break and have you, hopefully you all have a piece of paper and a pencil. If not, there's some pens back there. We're doing a little writing exercise to segue into our next next part of my talk about food writing. And to do that, I'm going to have, what you're going to do is just put your hand in and grab a Ziploc bag and pass it to the next person. And then, yes, so you'll get either a herb or a spice from the bag. And if it's not, the only exotic herb spice I have there is cardamom, which I'm sure people have cooked with, and allspice. But otherwise, there are common household herbs and spices that you can find in your kitchen. So feel free to open the Ziploc bag and take a sniff. So if everybody's received a package, what I'd like you to do is to open it and smell it. You can take it out, you can taste it. It's all organic. Some of the herbs are from my garden, or from nuggets. So they're not chemical or anything like that. And when you sniffed it or smelled it or tasted it, what memory did it evoke? Was it something that you ate last night? Something you want to cook? Something you had in your mother's kitchen, your grandmother's kitchen, your uncle's kitchen? I want you to write 1, 2, or 3 sentences about what memory the herb that you got evokes in you. And to write food writing, you really have to use all your senses. Taste, smell, how it feels, how it touches. You have to do that in all writing. If you want to be a literary writer, you have to use all your senses. A lot of the time when I'm writing, I actually have my eyes closed because I'm not even there. I can see it in my mind's eye while I'm writing it. But for food writing especially, it's very sensual, the writing, and very sensory, I guess. So if you could write a few sentences, then you're welcome to take a few minutes to do that. And now comes the challenging part. Would anybody want to share what they wrote? Okay. What herb did you get, or a spice?
I got lemon.
Okay.
It didn't smell like a lemon. It smelled of exotic herbs. Herbs of another time and place. Herbs of faraway places, of childhood stories of Ali Baba and Scheherazade. It brought to me images of jinns, magical genies that came from the sea. I saw elephants elegantly covered with silk and musical bangles. The smell was enchanting and brought enchantment.
Oh,
Wow.
all within 5 minutes. It's amazing. Yes.
My dream was very different. Mine said, I had garlic.
Ah.
And whenever I get garlic, I think of fresh garlic, melted butter with parsley over linguine and shrimp.
Oh my gosh. I figured that someone would be cooking with garlic in the. Yes.
This reminds me of gathering mint at my creek. I loved the smell of it as I pulled and broke off bunches from my freshly brewed tea. The aroma stayed with me as I walked through the pastures returning to the house.
Yeah.
Refreshing.
Yeah.
Lovely. Yes.
I'm very technical, so, and analytical, so here we go. A smell and taste I've never experienced before. Earthy, pungent, mildly pungent, slightly peppery. I have no memory reference of this spice that reminds me of more of coffee than anything else. This moment will seal my memory if I ever encounter this herb again.
Oh, wow.
Why don't you ask her?
Yeah, what
is it?
We're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's,
We thought, what did we think it was?
well.
Is it powder?
cardamom, I think.
No, it wasn't part of it.
Oh,
What's it?
that's allspice.
Curry.
This is
Allspice, yes.
That's allspice?
That's allspice.
That's like, is curry and allspice?
You know what? I think the bags from the nugget may have been contaminated. Because I smell curry in the basil.
Ah.
See, I smell
Because I think
curry in
someone
here.
may
This
have
does not
changed the
smell like
scoop.
allspice.
If you take it out, that's why I crushed them, thinking that might bring the
Interesting.
scent out.
Interesting.
Do that.
It just shows you can't buy from those bulk bins because they're not pure. So when I bought lavender, that, and something else, and it kind of made everything smell like curry. Oh, they're so powerful, the curry smell. And I didn't want to use curry because.
Yeah, the curry, it smells like.
Yeah, and it's from the store. It's interesting. Sorry about that.
Oh.
We got close.
Was it from a regular store? Was it from an Indian store?
Yeah, it does smell like an Indian store, but no, it was from a regular store, and I think maybe someone had used one of the, like interchanged the scoops. So, when you have food allergies, they recommend not using those bulk because people do tend to mix, and I think that's what happened. And the scent of the curry was so strong. I got it from those small bins that they have, and so the scent of whatever curry, garam masala, whatever it was, is so strong that it's contaminated even like the basil. I think the mint was okay probably, because it's such a fresh taste. Yeah. Is there anybody else who'd like to share? You look like, yes?
I touch the green leaves, they cling to my hand, sticking fast like a thought from long ago. In a shaded grove of trees, breezes blowing through the yellowing grass. I think of infinity, the black reaches of time and space. I go home and my father explains it the best he can, but he can't, so I return to that summer again and again.
What a memory. What herb did you get?
You tell me?
Is it rosemary? Looks like rosemary from here.
Yeah, I guess so.
That, rosemary is supposed to be the herb of remembrance.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh.
that's from Agatha Christie.
Very vivid. That's what happens. We have a bunch of writers.
I know. They go down memory lane with just a sprig of rosemary. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, I have a rosemary too. I remember the lamb shanks at a restaurant in Spain as the most delicious meal. It had a mysterious flavor everyone puzzled over. When we questioned the chef, he said that the lamb was feasting on the wild rosemary that was growing on the rocky hillside.
Is that what you have rosemary too?
Yeah.
Very nice.
Huh.
Yes.
The first time I prepared Greek linen soup, I called for a chicken broth. So I got this last one who would want just one.
I have a new phone, I don't know how to
Then it called for eggs, whipped up and slowly mixed into the hot broth, but I was in a hurry and it curdled. Well, put it all in the food processor and feed the family.
That was lovely. So you got a piece of lemon.
Oh,
That's cool.
I think there's, yes.
I went kind of a different route here. It smells like a spanking.
it smells like a what?
Spanking.
Oh,
The smell tastes like the gum Mom let me have as a little girl, with strict instructions not to swallow it lest I get all plugged up inside. And when done, spit it into her outstretched hand into her palm, except the time when I chewed and it fell out of my mouth onto the sidewalk where she stepped.
So you got a spanking.
uh-huh.
So you got mint.
I got spearmint actually.
Yeah.
I think.
I don't know, I got that at the farmer's market, so I don't know what it was, spearmint or mint, but oh, that's so fun. Anybody else? No? Okay. Well, I think AI we don't have to be worried about AI in this room because we take a little piece of rosemary of thyme or lemon and come up with our own stories. I don't think AI can do that. So I think we don't have to worry about that in this bunch of people. So this was my first book, My Mother's Kitchen. And from the very first dedication to the very last word in this book, it's a tribute to my mother. Now, in 2004, I got a phone call in the middle of the night, and you never get good phone calls in the middle of the night. It was from my sister in India saying that my mother had passed away. And we had known it was coming, and we had visited her a few months before this, but it was still devastating. And the only way I could handle the onslaught of emotions and memories was what you guys, writers, all do. We write it out. And then, so I ended up writing a small piece about a girl who my mother had saved from a neighboring village from an abusive household. And she was a teenager, and she ended up living with us and becoming a nanny and a babysitter for my sister and me. And so I remembered that story, and I wrote it out. And at the end, I added a recipe for my mother's lemon rice. And it seemed like a natural thing to do as a tribute to my mom, because she and I had such a good relationship in the kitchen. She was one of those people she was not a sophisticated cook. She didn't take time doing cooking. She liked things that were quick, so the recipes reflect that. Everything takes 20 minutes, 40 minutes. She was a school teacher, so she didn't have a lot of time to spend grinding spices and making elaborate meals. So the lemon rice recipe really reflects my mom's style of cooking, because it's simple, tasty, and anybody can do it. So about that time, I had joined a local writing group in Davis, and we were asked to bring something to share every week when we met. And I took my piece and I shared it with the group, and they liked it so much they encouraged me to keep adding to it. So I added vignettes, and what I did is I took a recipe and sort of added the story around the recipe. And it turns out it was little stories about a girl growing up in her mother's South Indian kitchen and the adventure she had. So these vignettes, we did it, and at the end of each chapter, I added a recipe. And so when I shared the stories with the writing group, I also shared the recipe. So I was like the most popular reader in our writing group. They loved it when it was my turn to read, because there was always treats involved. And so they tasted the recipes, and they also tasted, they heard the story, and then they tasted the description, because there was a lot of food description, and because the writing was revolving around recipes. At the end of the group, we met for almost 2 years, I had more than 30 recipes and chapters of vignettes, and so I had to edit it because it didn't make sense, because it wasn't quite a novel, it wasn't quite an essay collection, because there was a theme of the girl did grow up, so I had to do a little bit of editing, and then I sent it out to agents, and this was in 2008 when the economy wasn't doing very well, so rejection after rejection, and finally an indie press picked it up in 2013, and it was published in 2014. As Margie mentioned, it won quite a few awards and did quite well. And when it first came out, the people in Davis were very supportive of me. I had I went and attended, I think, about 25 book clubs in the area and tasted many variations of Mother's lemon rice. It's interesting, it's rice and lemon and ghee and cashews and turmeric, but boy, everybody who cooked it made it different. None of it tasted the same. Every single one was very different, which I think is sort of like writing. You know, it's like cooking is a little like writing. It's never the same when each person has its own experience and little touch. They add a little too much ghee or a little less turmeric or less lemon juice. I don't know what it is. So I'm going to share with you that first chapter that got it all started for me. This is a story about a girl named Kashi. This is in Mahagiri, South India. But I also wanted to mention that in my books, because Nilgiris meant so much to me, the Blue Mountains, I came up with a fictional town called Mahagiri. So my stories take place in Mahagiri, and it's really loosely based on the Nilgiris, the topography and the town and the way everything's laid out. Mahagiri, South India, 1955. The peace is shattered by someone hammering on the wooden doors. I'm almost asleep on my mother's lap, lulled by her soft voice, and I sit up, startled, blinking the sleep out of my eyes. Davy, our housekeeper, and my mother walk to the door. Stay in here, my mother says in a firm voice over her shoulder to me as she walks through the open doorway to unlatch the door. Who's there? Davy asks through the crack of the door. Please, Davy, sister, open the door, says a pleading voice. It's me, Kashi. Kashi? Mother exclaims. She unlocks the door and pulls it open. What's going on? I can't resist peeking out and almost yell in surprise when I see Kashi tumble into my mother's arms. Her face is bruised and one eyelid is swollen and closed tight. Come in the kitchen, my mother leads an exhausted Kashi inside. Meena, get up and pull out the mat from behind the door, she says. I run to do as I'm asked, and soon Kashi is curled on the bamboo mat. Kashi looks very different from her usual smiling self. She's the daughter of our cowhand, Bojan, and during the weekday she takes care of me and helps Davy in the kitchen with light chores. But now her round face with smiling dimples is drawn and thin, and her lips look like they would never smile again. They are so swollen and red. A cut on the corner of her mouth is leaking a string of blood. Davy pushes me aside to kneel beside the girl and wipes her face with a rag dipped in warm water. My mother is rummaging in a wooden box for her first aid supplies when there is a violent banging on the kitchen door. Mother turns with a questioning look at Kashi, who tries to sit up. She looks frightened and her voice is all squeaky. It's him, little mother. Don't let him take me away. My mother gets up and lays a reassuring hand on Kashi's forehead. Lie back down and don't worry. I won't let anyone take you away. She doesn't ask Kashi any more questions. She strides to the door and flings it open. Her back faces me and I can see she holds herself so straight and stiff that she looks taller than her 5 feet. What's the meaning of this racket? She asks in a cold voice. Is this the time of day to night to come knocking on the door and waking up a woman and a 5-year-old child? I peer around the kitchen wall through the half-open doorway and I see a group of men. Bojan is in front of them, his face apologetic in the dim light. There are 5 men behind him with flashlights and one carries a stout stick. Bojan steps toward my mother. Little mother, I'm sorry to cause such worry, he says in a careful and polite voice. All the villagers and neighbors call my mother Little Mother as a sign of respect. Her real name is Sudha Lakshmi. Tell her to return the girl, a voice shouts from behind him. Bojan turns and motions to the speaker to be quiet. Please, little mother, my daughter has to come with us. She's shamed me and my family and needs to be punished. My mother draws herself up taller, and although I can't see her expression, I know her lips are probably drawn in thin line in anger, and her black eyes flashing with temper. Bojan, you know better than to come knocking on the door at this time of night. Yes, your 15-year-old daughter is with me, and she stays here until she's better. Have you seen how she looks with her swollen face and black eye? But little mother, you don't understand, Bojan says when he's rudely interrupted by a man's voice. Let me up front, he says. He pushes Bojan aside. He's tall with with a thick woolen scarf wrapped around his head, and he looks like a giant next to my petite mother. His eyes are bloodshot, and his big mustache quivers every time he yells. His voice is loud, and I wince when he steps closer to my mother. "This girl is mine. Give her to me." My mother does not step back from his belligerent face. "Oh, and who are you? I know Bojan is her father, but what right do you have here?" "That girl was promised to me. I agreed to the marriage, and just today I caught her with another man. I demand she come with me. I know what to do with such girls." Bojan steps up to my mother in front of the aggressive stranger. Excuse me. "Little mother, this is Thimben. He's engaged to my daughter. She has disgraced him and my family." My mother looks over her shoulder and sees me peering around the corner and then looks back at Bojan and Thimben. If I agree to listen to your complaint tomorrow, will you leave me and my daughter alone tonight?" "We have to come back tomorrow?" Thimben asks. "I don't know. If you take the girl right now and something happens to her, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. The chief constable is a friend. Now it is late, and I think you should all go to bed and sleep off the toddy drink." She stops Bojan's protest with an impatient gesture. "I can smell the alcohol in your breath, so go home before you all do something you'll regret. I'll meet you here tomorrow morning." "You give me your word I can take the girl home tomorrow?" Thimben asks. My mother shakes her head. "I said I'll listen to you. We can decide on a course of action." Bojan pushes Thimben aside and says, "Little mother, thank you. We'll come back tomorrow." Grumbling a little, the men turn around and leave. Thimben turns back as if he wants to say something more, but Bojan pulls him away. He knows that my mother will keep her word, for he respects and trusts her. My mother closes the door, bolts it, and leans on it for a moment with her eyes closed. She then walks over to Kashi and pulls up a low wooden stool. She sits down and takes one of Kashi's small hands in her own. I scoot along the floor and come to rest beside my mother. The blood has been cleaned off Kashi's face. Devi applies a herbal ointment on her cheek and swollen chin. "Devi, warm some milk with honey for Kashi. Make up a spare mattress so that she can sleep on the floor in my room. And also bring a couple of aspirins from my room." Devi goes to light the small kerosene stove and places an aluminum saucepan with milk on the blue flame. She walks out of the room through the back door, avoiding the front door, which was now bolted and locked. My mother turns back to Kashi. "Now, Kashi, I need you to hear from you what happened. Then you can drink the milk and take some medicine for the pain. I want you to rest, but tell me what happened." "Oh, little mother, it's all my fault," Kashi wails, tears streaming down from beneath her puffy eyelids. "I know my father wanted me to marry old Thimben, but every time I'm near the well or by myself, he tries to grab me. I hate his hot, smelly breath. A few weeks ago, he tried to stop me when I was on my way here. I was surprised and screamed so loud that Raman, who was nearby, came over to help. When Thimben saw him, he went away, cursing Raman. I was so grateful to Raman that I took him a bowl of my sweet payasam pudding. He was by himself in the house and was so nice to me that I sat down and talked to him. Tonight I was going to his house with some leftover rice when Thimben came out from behind a tree and asked me where I was going. I tried to run away, but he grabbed me and said all kinds of bad things about me. When he slapped my face, I fell down. I tried to reach for him, but I hit him on the head. He tried again to reach for me, but I hit him on the head with the rice bowl and ran away as fast as I could. I had nowhere to go, so I came here. Kashi, what were you thinking? My mother sighs. I know it's hard to understand, but your father did what he thought was best for you. Kashi cries quietly. I feel sorry for her. She looks so sad and worn down, like the puppy my mother found on the side of the road after a truck hit it. I don't know what to do. I wanted to ask for your help, but I knew everyone would be angry with me. Please help me. My mother is quiet for such a long time that we can hear the pan of milk sizzle and the hoot of an owl outside. Meena, turn off the stove, she tells me. Kashi, I will try my best to help you. Do you want to marry this Raman? Kashi's tears stop. She tries to sit up, and the eye that is not swollen is filled with happy tears. You will help me? I don't want to marry anyone right now. Just then, Devi comes in with a jar of eucalyptus honey. Soon Kashi is sipping the hot milk and honey. We walk across our tiny courtyard to the bedroom, and I watch my mother tuck Kashi in and speak to her in low, reassuring tone. I can't hear what she says even though I strain my ears. Come, Miss Big Ears, my mother tweaks my ears. You've heard more than what's good for you tonight. It's way past your bedtime, Meenakutti. I wake up next morning and lie in bed for a moment, thinking about everything that happened the night before. I lean over to see if Kashi is still in bed, but the mattress is neatly rolled up and pushed to the side. I hop out of bed. I hope I'm not too late for the meeting. The morning is a busy time in the kitchen with the cowhands bringing in pails of fresh milk. My mother and Aya strain the milk and pour it into big tin cans ready to be delivered. Everyone wants to buy milk from our cows because our milk is never watered down. Little mother, we are ready for the clean milk can, says Bojan. My mother is definitely in charge of our cows and tells the cowhands when to milk the cows and how to take care of them. Today, my sister will be here to help in the vegetable garden, Bojan tells my mother as he collects the milk cans. That is good because we need help, Bojan. It's past time to plant the tomatoes. People from the village come and help plant our garden. We grow potatoes, beans, cabbage, and carrots in neat rows. The kitchen gets crowded with people and animals. Our 3 cats and dog try to force their way into the room and beg for a taste of the fresh milk. My mother always feeds them. I walk in and my mother looks up and smiles. It's my sleepyhead. Go, get something to drink. Kashi is in there. She gestures with her head toward the kitchen. Kashi's on the floor shelling sweet peas. I dip into the bowl of cream peas, pop a few fresh peas into my mouth. Kashi stops me before I grab another handful. Stop that, little one. Your mother has some warm milk for you right by the fireplace. She gets up and brings me a steel tumbler of warm milk. I sneak another handful of peas. I watch Kashi as she sits back down. Her face is still puffy and she looks lopsided. Her lips are raw and chapped. I feel sorry for her again. What's going to happen to you, I ask. She shrugs her shoulder and sighs. Your mother has promised to look after me, and I know she'll take care of me. Do you have a meeting yet? Yes, it was scary to see Thimbin again, but I sat next to your mother and didn't look at him. He was yelling and screaming, but your mother invited the chief constable. When he arrived, everyone was much quieter. I couldn't listen to everything because I was so nervous. Will you have to marry Thimbin? No, your mother said I could live here. When I turned 17, she said she'll arrange my marriage. Until then, I don't have to marry anyone. Kashi smiles, and even her discolored lip and bruised face, she looks like the old Kashi I know. I smile back. I'm happy she won't have to marry an old man with smelly breath. When you get married, I'll ask my mother to make you some lemon rice for the wedding feast, I say to Kashi, who giggles and gives me a handful of peas. I knew my mother would take care of Kashi. I take a sip of sweet milk and look around the smoke-darkened kitchen walls. I love this place with its warmth and its rich aromas of spices and cooking. There is no place like it. My mother's kitchen is a miracle working spot, a place of transformation. Here, a handful of rice, a pinch of turmeric, and a splash of fresh lemon juice are magically transformed into mouth-watering lemon rice. A slice of cucumber and tomato with a sprinkle of salt and pepper becomes a tangy relish. This special place not only brings about change in food, but in people too. But like all changes, it can sometimes be painful, For being such an enchanting place, the kitchen is actually very ordinary. It consists of 2 rooms connected by an open doorway. The first room has 3 pieces of furniture, all large and made of wood. There's a long teak table with measuring cups and milk strainers on it. The china cabinet occupies another wall filled with pieces of fine china as well as stainless steel pots and pans. Against yet another wall is a large cupboard with a mesh covering. I love to open this door and take whiffs of the buttery tang of yogurt and the biting aroma of dried chilies. The second part of the kitchen is where the cooking takes place. A large open fire hearth occupies most of the room. The cooking hearth is made of river clay, and every few weeks Devi walks to the riverbank and brings back a plastic bucket filled with moist red clay. She uses this clay to mend any cracks and smooth the edges of the open fireplace. On the wall opposite the cooking fireplace, there's a window with a wide ledge where ripening tomatoes, mangoes, and other seasonal fruits and vegetables stand in a row, attentive as soldiers on parade. Baskets of pungent onions and garlic, impossibly perfect red potatoes, orange-fleshed yams, and long tubers sit in a corner. Bunches of red chilies, garlic, and herbs hang from the low wooden beams, and their fragrance adds a pungency to the already aromatic kitchen. There are several low stools and a bench placed in front of the window. This special kitchen and my home are on a hilltop in the outskirts of the town of Mahagiri in South India. The house, with its red tile roof and smooth whitewashed walls, is surrounded by hundreds of tea bushes. From my backyard, the hillsides look as if they've been carpeted in green. As the first fingers of dawn light up the sky, the kitchen comes alive with the rich aromas of cooking and the cacophony of sounds. During the cool, foggy evenings, the kitchen is warm and cozy. Twilight has come and gone. The cows bedded down, and the only sounds in the still kitchen are the voices of Mother and Davy, idly gossiping about the day's events. A few embers glow in the fireplace, and my mother rests her aching back against the warm hearth. I join her, loving the comfort of her sturdy body. My mother's presence makes our house into a home. I have lived in this house my whole life, all 5 years of it, with my mother and Aya. I was born in this house, and Aya says she was right there to catch me. But now I'm almost as tall as Aya, even though she's a grown-up. Her face is all crinkly, like old paper. The best part of her face is a small diamond nose ring. I like to watch it flash in the sun and want one too. So I'm going to end it there. The chapter goes on just describing more of the kitchen, but you sort of get a flavoring of, this was the first chapter that I penned down as a tribute to my mother. And it wasn't hard to write because I imagined myself being in that kitchen growing up, and the description that you have is very similar to the place that I grew up in. And years later when we visited, it was so surprising to see it was nothing like what I remembered. You cannot go home, that's for sure. I wanted to add, food is so important because of course it feeds and nourishes our body, but it also soothes our souls. And sometimes it mends broken hearts and broken spirits. And the mother in this story, Sudha, has a terrible loss, and going to the kitchen and being around food heals her. And this is just a couple of lines, a short side. Just want to show you how she uses food to heal. It's called Sudha's story. Her sister Rukmani was 5 years old, and she was barely 2 when their parents were killed in an accident on their way to sell fresh coconuts at the local market. Sudha can still remember watching her father's skinny legs hugging the coconut tree trunk as he shimmied up to the very top of the tree to knock down coconut after coconut. With just a piece of jute rope tied between his ankles, he could climb the tallest tree in just a few seconds. The coconuts from the tall trees were tender and filled with sweet water. Their fresh taste was popular, and so once a month, my parents made the trip into the next village to sell the coconuts and buy rice and vegetables. But this night, they never returned. When Sudha was much older, a neighbor would tell her that the bullock cart driver had fallen asleep and let his bullock carts lead the cart into a ditch. The wheels were stuck in the thick mud, and the driver just managed to jump out of the cart before it flipped over into the ditch, which was now filled with water from the recent monsoon rains. The bulls fought for a foothold, but the cart overturned, and her parents were later recovered, their bodies bloated and filled with muddy ditch water. And that day changed their lives. Suddenly, they were orphan girls. The people of the little village were a tight-knit group, and most of them were related to each other by marriage or birth. A distant uncle and aunt with no children of their own agreed to give the 2 sisters a home. Sudha missed her mother's voice and soft touch. She was a frightened little girl when she first met her aunt. "Come, Sudha, you don't have to be shy with me," said a voice, and a pair of arms lifted her up. She gazed into the big brown eyes of her aunt Sita. Her aunt sat her down on a chair and drew Rukmani close to her. "Both of you are welcome to live with me and your Uncle Ramu," she said. "I know it's hard to lose both your parents, but maybe we can find something to help you two." She put Sudha down and took each girl's arm. "Come with me to the kitchen." Sita's kitchen would have been dark and smoky, but for a large skylight in the roof. Sunlight poured in and turned the small, homely space into a warm and inviting area. There was a wooden table for chopping vegetables, a large hearth where huge logs were burned, bunches of herbs and gourds hung from the overhead rafters. Sita led the girls into the kitchen and asked them to sit on low wooden stools. "Now, whenever I feel sad or lost, if I keep my hands busy, then I find that everything always works out." Sita washed her hands in the sink. She then took down a stainless steel container and scooped out 2 cups of some white grain. This is suji, she said. She poured the cream of wheat into a large saucepan and placing it on the hearth. She added several spoonfuls of golden ghee, and soon the kitchen was filled with the toasty smell of wheat and brown butter. Soon I'll add some sugar, she said. Rukmini, come here and keep stirring the suji so that it doesn't stick to the pan. Sudha, I need your help. Can you peel these cardamom pods and crush them in the mortar and pestle? She showed Sudha how to peel the pale green pods and take out the tiny wrinkle seeds. Sudha thought it was a miracle that the tiny dark seeds could contain such a heady fragrance, a powerful scent that filled the room and her heart. The sweet spice mended 2 broken hearts as it permeated the room with its aroma. When the cream of wheat turned a pale golden color, Sita added some sugar and then a cup of hot water from a pot on the hearth. The sweet mixture immediately formed a thick pudding. She kept stirring the pudding until it was tender and smooth. She took out a stainless container and pried open the lid. This is special saffron coming all the way from the snowy slopes of the Himalayan mountains. She placed a small pinch of the bright orange strands into a spoonful of warm butter. Immediately the water turned a bright orange and the air was filled with the exotic smell of the spice. As the saffron was softening, she took time to heat a saucepan on the flame. When the saucepan was warm, she added a generous amount of golden ghee and waited for the liquid butter to warm. Sudha, you can bring the cardamom powder, and Rukmini, can you get me that container? Sita took the container from Rukmini, opened it, and pulled out a plastic bag of plump cashews and another bag of dark red raisins. Sita added a handful of nuts and raisins to the warm ghee, and soon, using a wooden ladle, stirred the mixture. The raisins seemed to drink up the butter and turned large and juicy. The cashews were more restrained, retaining their beautiful shapes but turning a golden brown. The delicious sweet smell of frying nuts and raisins filled the kitchen. Sita took the saucepan off the fire and added the powdered cardamom to the cashews. Next, she added the aromatic mixture and the saffron threads into the thick wheat pudding. Using a wooden spoon, she made sure the pudding was a uniform orange color and the nuts and raisins were evenly distributed. She placed generous scoops of the fragrant pudding on 2 steel plates. She handed one to each of the girls. Sudha took a bite of the creamy pudding, rich with ghee and cardamom, and sighed in pleasure. Auntie Sita, I want to learn how to make such a delicious pudding, she said. Sita laughed. Of course you do, and everyone who tastes my pudding wants to make it. I'll be happy to teach you. The kitchen became Sudha's refuge. She learned to make stews using bitter melon, good for diabetes and high blood pressure. Sita pointed out as she chopped slices of the wart-like vegetable. Sudha learned the secret of spices and the wonder of working with fresh vegetables, from pale green eggplants to brilliant orange pumpkins. Over time, the ache in her heart for her parents was filled with the pungency of coriander seeds, the sweetness of cinnamon, and the bite of fresh chili peppers. So she sautéed, fried, boiled, and chopped in her little kitchen. Thank you for patiently listening to my readings and my bantering. Do you have any questions, Margie?
Yes, so you said originally you had like all these vignettes you wrote up for your book. So how did you decide what to keep and how to organize it and what to leave out from your book?
Well, what I wanted to do was tell a narrative, a story about the girls. So anything that didn't advance that story, I took out. And then when I sent it to, I actually had an agent who worked with me when I first sent it out. She took out a lot of the stuff. And she actually changed some of the stuff the way it was laid out. And I'm not sure I agree. If I ever get it printed again, I may change it because I don't agree with how she did it. And then anyway, it was a matter of just making sure that the plot worked. And there are some, mostly the reviews have been good. There was one negative review where she said it was more vignettes than novels. That person didn't find there was enough of a plot. Now, I kind of, and I understand what she was talking about, even though there is enough to keep the story going. What I did is I talked about Meena going through, and then all the women in her lives, and I went into their little backstory. That's what you read right now, her mother's backstory. And Aya, who's the nanny, her backstory, how she ended up in this household, and how they have a character, a mutti, a granny that comes and lives with them, why she ended up there. So it's a group of women that ended up living together. And this is all, loosely based on my own life. My mother herself did have a herd of cows, and she did sell milk. And so I drew upon my own experiences. When I was going to school in India, I went to an English convent, which was actually a public school, but it was actually a private school, like they say in England, like the Harry Potter. And we had houses like Harry Potter had. I was in the greenhouse, St. Raphael's. And the English teacher always told us in those days, write what you know. And of course now, when you have fantasy and science fiction, it's not always what you know, it's whatever's in your head. And then so I kind of kept that in mind when I was writing it. Now this is what I wanted to say. And deep down when I'm writing it, I would ask, can I share this story with my mother? Would my mother be proud of what she read? And that was my goal when I was writing it, something that kept me going. Yes.
I absolutely loved your writing. I could see the whole thing. I could just see the India and everything else, and it just made me hungry. And it was really good. But I have a question. How long did you live in India, and when did you come to America?
Well, I grew up in India. I was born in the Nilgiris in a small town. And when I was 9 years old, my granny, who I called my granny, wanted to visit her son, who had settled down in California. So I was almost 10 years old. My sister was 6 years old. So the three of us came by ourselves to America, and I was the one in charge of the passports and the tickets because they didn't know a lick of English. Oh. So I don't know how I did it, and I don't know how my mother sent us on that trip, but she did. And we stayed here from 70 to 73. And later my mother joined us and my father, and my mother didn't want us to grow up here, so we went back to India. And in mid-70s, my father passed away from a heart attack, and so the rest of the family, my mother's side family, when I turned 18, wanted to arrange my marriage. And I went through a seeing ceremony like Meera did, which is the basis of what happened to her. And they held a seeing ceremony at an aunt's house. And instead of the groom coming, he sent his aunt and a cousin to come see me. And his theory was he didn't want to come until he was sure I would say yes to the marriage. If there was any chance that I'd say no, he didn't want to come and be ashamed, be shamed by it. So I don't know what made me say it. I said, there's no way I'm going to marry someone I've never seen. And I can't tell you the uproar in my family. It's horrible. They made my life miserable for the next few months. And so I wrote a letter to my uncle who lived in the Bay Area and said, I just can't live here anymore. I was going to college at that time. And I can't live here anymore. I don't know what to do. And so he wrote me a letter with an airplane ticket and a visa application student. And I ended up coming the following year. It took a year and a half. And I went to Sonoma State and I got a bachelor's in journalism, and then I got a master's partly from Berkeley and partly from Sonoma State in journalism. And I worked as a reporter first for the neighbor section of the Sacramento Bee, and then for several other newspapers in Southern California. So that's how I ended up
Interesting.
here. And then when I was leaving India to come to study here in 1982, the advice a cousin gave me at the airport is just don't come back with a white guy. Just don't marry an American. And I didn't meet anybody till the last year in college, and that's because I was always in the library and he was always in the pub. He'll tell you differently. Don't believe him. And so he came back with me to India. And he worked through the YMCA. He built a water solar heater for a village so that their well water went through the solar heater so it wasn't contaminated. And it stayed there for many years till I think a monsoon came and took it away. So he did that, and then we brought him and met my family, and both of us, we were married in 1986 in India. So we've been 37 years, and we have 2 sons and a grandson. So I didn't think that a boy from New Jersey and a girl from South India would be able to stick it out, but we did.
So he's a white guy, huh? He's a white guy? Yeah.
He's blonde.
Catherine, he's down there.
Yeah, he's back there.
Oh, he's back
I didn't
there.
want to embarrass him.
Oh, cool.
Yes, hi, Meera. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very wonderful. You mentioned that you won some awards. The book won some awards. Could you tell me about them? Can you tell us where they came from? What were they for?
Well, the Mother's Kitchen, so when you're an indie press, there are certain awards that are for just independently published people. And I had selected, and all the ones, quite a few. The first one was the National Indie Excellence Award, and they have different categories, and this book won in multicultural category. They had that as an option. And at one time, the Beverly Hills Book Award, at that time everybody thought it was a vanity award, but now they think it's been going on for many years, and so it's not considered a vanity award. And then this Seeing Ceremony won a huge award where I actually had to give a speech, and accepted it. It was from the Next Generation Indie Awards. And they're actually accepting, if you're a writer, awards applications right now for the award for next year. And they are huge. And then I won 2 sections. One, I shared the best novel with another lady, and then I won grand prize. And then the Feathered Quill Award.
This best novel, where did this come from?
Next Generation Indie.
Oh, okay.
I see, that was. what it
Yeah,
was.
there was 2 awards that I won. You could do it in 2
Okay.
categories. When you do an early bird, they let you do another free category. So I did second novel, and I tied with another person. And then the Feathered Quill, it won Best Romance Novel.
Thank you.
So when I was growing up in India, all my friends, there was a lot of peer pressure, not to do drugs, but to become doctors. So all my friends, that was our aspiration, to become doctors. And so one summer, my mother took time off, and because she was a school teacher, she had that time off. And she took us, several of my friends and myself and my sister, on a tour of several universities. And after we traveled, I came home and had the worst stomach food poisoning. And I was so ill that the doctor said if we hadn't gone to see him at the time we did, I would have probably died. I was so dehydrated. We didn't know anything about getting. So when we went to the doctor, and I'm lying there in bed, and he was well known in the area, and he came up and he said, if you're still interested in becoming a doctor, I'm happy to write you a reference to my alma mater. And I'm like, yes. And then he goes, well, why do you want to be a doctor? And I said, well, I want to go to medical school, and then I want to open up a office and maybe a practice in a rural village, and then I want to interview all these people, and I want to write stories about these people. It doesn't sound, because I said I wanted to be just like James Herriot. I want to write about all these quirky characters I meet. He goes, I don't think you want to be a doctor. I think you want to be a writer. So that was an epiphany. I was about 16 then, and I changed the course, and then all my friends went into biochemistry and chemistry, and I went into English. So that was a big changing point in my life where I decided that's what I'm going to do. And then when I came to America, my aunt, who I was very close to, she just passed away 2 years ago at age 101. She and I were very close, and she taught me. She's from South. She was a Virginian, and love of Southern literature. Because of her, I like Theodora Welty and Rita Mae Brown and all those people, and Tyler. She was trying to tell me that, as a writer, you need to make a living, and so that's why I went into reporting, thinking I could, in my spare time, write. It didn't quite work out that way. Then life came around, and I had kids, and there were soccer practices and baseball and all that. And finally, when the kids were in kindergarten is when I started writing, and it took a long time to get the book published. And obviously I'm a very late bloomer.
Great story.
Yeah, great story.